the whole thing just collapsed on itself, taking me with it. And knowing what was downwave, knowing what was between me and where that wave was going, I wanted to stay upright because there was nothing but just landmines of rocks just under the surface. And so I did my best to stay upright, tumbling with the wave end over end. And when things kind of settled out, I was surfing sideways. The wave had broached my kayak sideways and was carrying me in towards the sea cliffs. And I had gotten myself stable enough to kind of peel my eyes open and look where I was going towards. And I realized that this wave was hurtling me towards the sea cliffs and that I was going to make impact in a few seconds.
Welcome to the Art of Adventure podcast. This is big episode 250 with pro kayaker Paul Kuthe. The Art of Adventure is the podcast that helps you travel the world, run your business, and embark on an epic quest. I'm your host, lead explorer and guide Derek Loudermilk. You can find this episode and all the other episodes on derekloudermilk.com. That's where you find the show notes and the links and, of course, all the other stuff that I'm up to, the books, Superconductors, for example, and Adventure Quest Travel, and the business coaching for adventurous entrepreneurs. All right, and today's episode is Paul Kuthe. He and I, we are both from St. Louis. We both grew up playing outdoors in the wilderness here in Missouri. And actually, if you've never been to Missouri, there's a lot. I think more than half the state is national forest. So there's a lot of semi-wilderness here. So a lot of great stuff. He was in the rivers a lot once he got the kayaking bug. And when I met him at a party a couple of years ago, I was like, okay, I knew I wanted to be friends with Paul. We actually he was working at an outdoor gear store about the time when I was shopping there. We're very similar age. So it's really cool to reconnect and do this interview. And Paul is known in the kayaking world for pioneering the discipline of sea kayak surfing and playing in the waves like a surfer on your sea kayak. He was one of the people who invented this discipline, from what I gather. So he's really pushing the edge in the sport of kayaking. And we'll talk a little bit about how he became a pro kayaker, because how do you become a pro kayaker in little streams in Missouri, and how some key mentorship. He got to meet some of the very best kayakers, and they gave him advice, and he decided to move and immerse himself in the West Coast kayaking scene, and that shaped his career. We'll also talk about a near career-ending accident that happened just a couple years ago. He talks about it in dramatic detail and all of the thought processes that were happening in the moment as he was undergoing this imminent collision, and how that accident spurred him to ramp up his coaching business. He founded Tributary Coaching, and now that's in parallel pursuit with his kayaking career. And we also talk about what fertile ground kayaking and surfing and sport is as an analogy or philosophy for building a coaching practice. So really interesting episode. I know you're going to love this one. Paul is an amazing storyteller and teacher. Here he is, Paul Kuthe. Welcome, Paul, to the Art of Adventure.
Thanks so much. Great to be here.
And Paul, I'm excited to have you on the show. We first met at your sister's party a few years back.
That's right.
But both from St. Louis, and it's kind of cool because we both have this background of professional athletics moving into coaching, and so it's kind of cool to know that you're out there using your life history in your business, and it kind of helps me, think about that for myself, and then we get to know each other a little bit more through Activate Your Life. So you're now a best-selling author. Congrats.
Yeah, back at you. Yeah.
So that was kind of cool to have our relationship continue. And so having you on the podcast today is awesome, because I'm going to get to learn a bit about kayaking, which I don't really know much about.
Ah, nice.
So my first question is, growing up in St. Louis, we have a lot of rivers here, big rivers, easy rivers. I did a lot of canoeing. How did you get into kayaking coming from St. Louis?
Yeah, well, I mean, similarly, canoeing is really the root of it all. When you come from the Midwest and you're in Missouri, the only way to escape the oppressive humidity and terrible heat waves we get in the summer are to mosey on down to some of the spring-fed streams that flow out of some of the caves and springs down there in southern Missouri. With all the limestone geology, it really creates some unique areas where in the heat of the summer, there's actually still crystal clear, beautiful, cold water to go and play in. And so I know a lot of folks come down from St. Louis and go canoeing over the weekend, and it becomes kind of a beer fest. And my dad was someone who could enjoy a good party, but also really wanted to show his son some of the beautiful places and streams without so much of a crowd. So we started going during the week, over summer vacations, and we had found ourselves down on the Buffalo River in Arkansas, actually. And we drove past this sign that said rental kayaks. This was in the early 90s, and kayaks were not very popular. You didn't see them very much. And so when we passed that sign, we took notice and decided, we should try kayaks out. And I was 10 at the time, so the idea of having my own boat and the freedom to go and explore the river without dad steering the whole time was pretty much it. Like that was definitely what we were going to do that day. And I think about 5 minutes in to seeing me jump in the boat and start paddling around, my dad realized that he was watching his canoe partner become a kayaker, and he was losing his canoe partner in that very moment. And so I think that kind of got the ball rolling. Later on that next winter, he scrounged together enough cash to pick up a couple of very used whitewater kayaks and started the ball rolling.
That's I can totally relate. My parents had, growing up, this old aluminum Grumman sitting in our backyard. Most of the time we'd strap it to the top of the car, and
classic
in the summer, go down, and gosh, these rivers in Missouri, they're so great because you have your hillbillies and your rednecks out there, and then like all the city folks, and it's like these two cultures collide on the river, and the sandbar culture of people sitting in their lawn chairs with the beer in the cooler tied to their chair in the river, and then the local boys like got a snake on a string like lowering into people's boats. Man, it's such a good time.
It is quite the cultural experience for sure.
But for people listening, canoeing, you really only get to steer when you're in the back. And so the person in the front, they're kind of the stoker, they're the power, and they're like point out the rocks and stuff. But I can imagine as a 10-year-old going from, I assume, being in the front of the canoe to all of a sudden having the autonomy of a kayak would be like getting your first car or something.
Yeah. Oh, it really was. And one of the first things I did was like, there's a random rock island in the middle of the river. Well, I can just paddle over there and climb off of it and jump off whenever I want. And so I went ahead and did that. And like having that ability to go where you want, do what you want, and taste that freedom. I mean, the river gives you a lot of sense of freedom in that you're not on a hiking trail. There's not like a prescribed path you have to take. And to be able to have that sort of freedom at such a young age, there was no going back. There was no chance of getting me back into a canoe unless I knew that I could get back into a kayak soon after. So it was pretty much a done deal.
And so I think a lot of people that get into sports at a young age, they evolve out of them. What kept you in the sport?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of it was just that camaraderie and time with my dad. That certainly was an important factor. But the sport itself gives this amazing sense of exploration because there's water everywhere. There's a lot of different types of water to go and explore. But I think it was that ability to go wherever you want within that space. Kind of mentioned before that like hiking trail thing where you kind of have a path cut through the forest for you and you sort of follow that path. Well, there isn't any of that with canoeing or kayaking. There's the river does form its own path through the landscape, but on that river itself or on the ocean or lake, you can really go wherever it is that your abilities can take you, as long as you're operating within the scope of what the craft can handle and what your skills can handle. It's wide open. And so I think that sense of exploration and freedom is a big part of it. think some of it also is just the ability for it to transport you into a different landscape, into a different setting and a different feel so quickly and efficiently. I mean, to do the same thing hiking, you'd have to walk for miles and miles and miles, maybe days, to get some of the places that we would just effortlessly drift through the forest to arrive at. And so there was that sense of exploration, but also that ease of getting into places that no one else really gets to see, or at least very few people get to experience. And so there's something very special about that made me want to keep pursuing and seeing, what other areas could I explore that no one else has seen.
Yeah, I can totally relate. When you're on a river and you're going past some place, it's like you're in your world on the river, and then if you're going down a river, you're passing farms or towns or people or whatever, but they're like living their lives while you're in the middle of this experience of being in the flow. And it feels like it's very different than the people on the banks.
Definitely.
I would say.
Definitely. Oh, it is. And they so often are, you can tell they're envious, and especially in the early days, they sort of want to know what the heck those things were. Had a lot of confused folks kind of asking, like, are your legs sticking through the bottom of the kayak? Are you walking on the bottom of the river? Like, how does it work? Do you have legs?
Do you have legs?
I think one of the kind of appealing things early on was that sort of avant-garde stage of the sport where it was kind of mostly unknown, especially in the Midwest. The raising of eyebrows and the sort of the peculiar looks, I think, was part of the appeal. Being just that much more different and kind of standing out in the crowd was fun and exciting. And to have adults asking a kid, like, how do you do that? Made me feel really good.
Oh yeah, and so that's kind of cool being in a sport that's getting more popular. Were there some early heroes that you looked up to as a kid that you had posters of or things like that?
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, a lot of my classmates would cut out posters of their favorite musicians or action heroes or movie stars. And I was busy like cutting up my Paddler magazine articles and cutting the like kayaking pictures of the rapids I really wanted to run as I grew older. And I sort of plastered those all over my walls. One of the athletes that emerged pretty early on for me was a guy called Scott Lindgren. And Scott is still alive today. He actually battled through a brain tumor and is still out there adventuring and paddling hard. But when I first met him, he was doing something for Outside Magazine. It was the yard-long Sang Po expedition in around the Tibet area, one of the major holy rivers around the Himalayan mountain range. And he came to St. Louis to do, as part of his film tour, to do a showing of his expedition as part of the Outside Magazine film tour there. And it was my job to drive him around, show him the venue. I was working for the Alpine shop there in St. Louis. And I was sort of tasked with making sure he got to the venue, which was somewhere downtown. I promptly got him lost in downtown. I got to see a gnarly Class 6 kayaker get legitimately afraid driving through downtown St. Louis because I was lost, going through all sorts of neighborhoods we probably shouldn't have been. Eventually, I did get him to the venue, but I was able to pick his brain along the way, and he had a lot to do with my move out to Oregon, actually, and sort of gave me some advice and during that car ride through the hood in St. Louis as to what I needed to do if I actually was to pursue a professional career in kayaking.
That's amazing. So how old were you on that car ride?
I must have been 16, maybe 17, because I was working for the shop and had a driver's license, but not much older than that.
Wow. So this legendary kayaker, one of your heroes, and you get to hang out with him in your car. And what did he say to you?
So he was like, Paul, I'm gonna be honest with you. If you're gonna make that happen, you're gonna need to move. You're gonna need to leave behind everything that you know and everything that you love, your girlfriend, your mom, your job, everything, and you're gonna have to put yourself where that world exists, and it's not here. And it was a hard thing to hear. It laid a path in front of me that I knew was going to be challenging and lonely at times, but it's exactly what I needed to hear at that moment, because the idea of becoming a professional kayaker in Missouri, it wasn't going to happen. I couldn't get onto the difficulty of rivers with the frequency that I needed to. I couldn't link up with people that were at the level I needed to be at in the sport to collaborate with. There was no way that was going to work out for me. And so he's absolutely right. But it was tough advice to hear and know what to do with at that age.
Yeah. So did you do anything immediately? When did you move to Oregon? First of all, how old were you when you moved there?
I moved there when I was 20.
20. So yeah. 4 years, let's say maybe 3 after that car ride.
About 3 years later. Yeah. Things happened in between. I definitely, I took it to heart. I started asking him, well, where, if I'm going to need to go somewhere, where are my options? And he talked about Portland. He talked about Northern California, and he talked about the Appalachian range around Asheville, North Carolina area as being just hotbeds for the sport. And so I started planning and started working as hard as I could to save up the money I needed to do a bit of a tour. I was looking at colleges back east with some intention to go to continue my education back there in the North Carolina sort of area. But I also wanted to see the West Coast. And so I gathered up with some folks from the Alpine shop, some coworkers who were headed out doing a climbing expedition on Mount Rainier. And I had a car. They did not. And I knew that the plan for them was to go to Alaska to work for the summer, hit up Mount Rainier on the way, and see what they could do as far as saving some money over the summer. And so I knew I had a big move ahead of me. I also knew I wanted to see the West and get a sense of exploration for my summer there. So I spent the summer driving to Alaska in my Isuzu rodeo with 3 other friends from the shop. And I kind of took that summer to work up in Alaska and continue saving money and continue feeding the fuel and practicing my craft. As I passed through Portland, Oregon, on my way back home, I stopped by a couple different outdoor stores, looked at what was going on here at the scene, and we eventually made our way down to San Francisco and back across the country to St. Louis. But I couldn't get the Northwest out of my head. And so since it was on one of the lists that Scott Lindgren said I should go and check out, and I really felt a connection to it, I decided I would work for a solid year at the hospital. My mom managed to get me a job in the operating room as a purchaser buying medical supplies. And I worked for a year saving up all I could. My girlfriend broke up with me, so that was an easy thing to part ways with. And I hit the road. It was myself, a dog, a couple of mountain bikes, and a couple of kayaks. And my plan was to hit Portland, sleep in my car, sleep on couches, sleep wherever I needed to, and go get a job at Alder Creek Kayak and Canoe, which is where I worked for about 15 years and sort of built my professional paddling career from there.
Wow. I see a lot of similarities between us here. This is so cool. It's not Portland, but Boulder is sort of the center for cycling. And I always knew that you need to be where stuff's happening. And it's great advice that guy gave you. If you're a musician, go to Nashville. If you're, if you want to build rockets, go to Southern California. And surrounding yourself with those people that are your peers and your competitors. Cool. And so your mom was getting you this job. She knew that you were going to go and do this thing. And your dad, obviously, he bought you your first kayaks. What type of support or encouragement were they giving you? Because this wasn't like an obvious sports trajectory like football or baseball would be.
Sure. Yeah. My mom was really big on giving me a lot of range and a lot of experiences. So I played a lot of the typical, soccer, baseball, basketball, a lot of the typical team sports. And my dad wasn't into any of that stuff. He was really into more individual sports. He was actually a cyclist. And so my first sport as a kid with him was long bike rides. And what really kind of got us into kayaking was his shoulder would hurt and flare up every time he would do a longer, more cardiovascular sort of bike ride. And it wasn't long into our paddling career where he had a heart attack and died on the river while we were paddling in Colorado, not too far from Boulder, actually. And so at this point in my kind of paddling career, as I was heading off to head to Portland, he died when I was 12. So he wasn't there Mom wasn't encouraging as she could be. She definitely didn't want to see me go. She enjoyed hanging out, working with me at the hospital, having lunches together, keeping me close. She still lives a short jaunt from where she grew up, 70 plus years ago. And so I was kind of one of the only people in my family to really want to shoot out across the continent and be far away. So I was getting as much encouragement as she could muster, and she definitely didn't hold me back in any ways. In a lot of ways, she made it happen, because after my dad died, she kept me paddling. She actually installed a big ugly roof rack on her nice new sedan, just so that I could get my kayak to pool sessions every week. And she made sure that she met all these kayaking people from my river trips with my dad, and made sure that she knew who I could go with, and made sure that I was still able to pursue the sport. And so I can fully appreciate her in that she didn't want me to go, but she never said so, and she did everything she could to enable that to happen. So it was a challenge, but at some point you just have to sometimes go against your parents' best wishes to make your life happen. So that was something that just had to happen.
Yeah, and I don't want to skip over. It seems like it could have been very impactful. Were you there on the river when your dad had that heart attack?
I was. Yeah, I actually found him. And so it's a story I've told a number of times, and I'm comfortable talking about it. And it did have a huge impact on my life, my progression into the sport. And it really, I credit him with giving me one of the greatest gifts that I've been given, which is the appreciation of the brevity of our time here. As a 12-year-old kid, going on kayaking trips, not a lot of people my age on these sort of trips. I spent a lot of time sitting around campfires with folks that were closer to middle age, and they would always say, "Oh, if I only started this sport when I was your age, oh, you should enjoy it. You should appreciate that. You should really make sure you get the most out of this." And I really took it to heart. And then when my dad died on the river due to a heart attack, it just drove that home that much more powerfully, which is, he spent a lot of time working jobs he hated and doing things that didn't actually fulfill his life at all. And he had a lot of regrets as a guy. And so I really wanted to make sure that I didn't do the same thing, that I didn't just work a job for the paycheck, that I didn't just be mediocre with my pursuits and happiness and sport and whatever I was doing. And so by losing him at such an important age, a lot of people would imagine that I missed out on quite a lot of that time with him. But the time we did have, my folks were split up. We would do every other weekend together. So the time we did have was really quality time. And he taught me so much in his passing that I'm sure he never intended to. But it was probably one of the biggest factors on why I moved across the country and why I took such an atypical career path, and why I'm not satisfied with just doing a normal job.
Yeah, that whole relationship with death and how, fleeting life can be, seems to force people to take action and sort of be brave and bold. Is that something that's sort of affected your decision making consistently throughout your life since then?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, no, it definitely has. And there's certainly moments where it's a lot of uncertainty in business and adventure and in life, and in kayaking. And so that same level of uncertainty and taking action and paddling towards the horizon line, despite not knowing what was beyond it, is a big part of what I draw from in business and life now. And so it's definitely a really hard time, and I think it was especially made hard because I did find him on the side of the river. Luckily, I wasn't completely alone. I waved some paddlers over to the bank, just some random passersby, to help me out with that moment. I'm not sure how it would have been if I actually was completely alone, but that whole time in my life was had a huge impact then, but it continues to impact every decision I make moving forward. And now that I have sons, I think about that quite a lot. As a lot of people, I think when they have kids, they tend to want to take the safe path. They want to be, secure. They take the regular job. They sort of stop living their life. And I wanted to be an example that was different for my boys. I don't want to stop pursuing what's important to me just purely because of their arrival. I want to live in a way that exemplifies what I think is going to be important for them, which is to not follow the designated path. I mean, the state of things in our economy and our world and how quickly things change right now, I don't think we can afford to just assume we can just follow in our folks' footstep or take the conventional path. It seems like more and more we're going to be creating our own personal brands, creating our own businesses, creating our own lifestyles that fit. I don't think we can really rely on those predictable paths anymore. So I really wanted to really show my boys that same thing. That's why I do an unconventional job. I still go and kayak and push myself. I ride a motorcycle. I take risks. I do things that maybe a lot of other parents wouldn't, partially for my own benefit, but partially to show them that you don't stop living just because you invite a new life into the world.
And what is your relationship with risk? Because I guess I don't fully know how dangerous kayaking is, but I assume when you're pushing the limits, potentially there's the risk of mortality, or at the very least, some injury. So, yeah, what is your relationship with risk in kayaking?
Yeah, well, so a lot of people see footage of me kayaking. They'll go online and they'll look me up, and they'll hit on like the National Geographic videos and the death-defying things, and Nat Geo loves a good like near-death story. And a lot of times the sport of kayaking gets portrayed as this ultra risky thing, and it does have its risks, and you're operating in critical environments, right? You're like scuba diving or mountaineering. You're not in places where an ambulance can just roll up and help you out. A lot of times you're deep in the wilderness, away from a cell phone signal, even if you could call somebody that's going to take them hours to even get to you, much less provide care. And so I find myself in situations that normal folks would consider very, very risky. But I think a lot of times they forget to factor in the decades of experience and decision making and skill building and things that all serve to help moderate that risk quite a bit. And I'm kind of chicken shit, honestly. Like, I'm pretty scared. I'm not like super brave, courageous guy like a lot of people assume that I am. All the risks that I take on the water are very calculated and are quite conservative compared to where I'm at skill level. And I don't say that to be boastful. I'm very modest in what I think I can accomplish. My skill set would lend itself to be able to do things that are another notch up. But I actually am fairly conservative. So my relationship with risk is a complex one. Again, I ride a motorcycle. A lot of people will consider that extremely risky, and it is. There's a lot of factors you can't control there. But I think without any risk, things get really boring. I'd much rather risk it and have some good stories and have those experiences and work to moderate the risk where I need to. But man, you can go and have yourself a heart attack sitting in front of the TV too. And so I think that it's really important to remember that, like, gosh, again, life is so brief. It's really, none of us are making it out of here alive anyway. You might as well have some darn good stories along the way. And risk is a part of that. I think starting a business, starting a family, kayaking, all those things carry a certain level of risk, as does inactivity. So I think either way you're risking it. It just depends on how you're going to go about it and what's worth that risk and what are you doing to reduce that risk a little bit.
That's an interesting concept. I'm not sure I've heard that before. The risk of inactivity. Interesting way of thinking.
There certainly is. I mean, there's often when I'm working with clients and we're considering some actions and we're trying to push past some barriers, it's like, yeah, I mean, the carrot on the end of the stick is nice, like what I'm trying to achieve. All right, great. But like, what's the risk of inaction around this? And often it's diving down into that road and thinking about, all right, let's play this out 6 months, a year, 3 years from now. If I don't start taking action on this sort of stuff, what happens then? And often it paints a very undesirable picture for them. And I think as a species, a lot of times we like to think of ourselves as chasing the carrot, but in reality, a lot of times our decisions and our biggest actions are to fend off threats, to fend off that stick. And so if we can understand that, I think that taking action becomes a lot easier. So for me, the risk of inaction, the risk of not going kayaking and not risking running some waterfalls is depression and feeling unengaged or disengaged with life. And physically, like it fuels a lot of my workouts because I want to be strong and be quick and be sharp so that when I am out there doing what I love, I'm not going to miss a beat. I'm not going to be a half second behind to where those risks are a big factor. And so all of a sudden depression, my fuel or my motivation for doing workouts reduces. Then again, my health goes downhill and I actually risk just having that cycle continue of depriving my sons of their dad prematurely. And so I think by not going kayaking and by not doing the risky things, I actually risk quite a bit more.
And so now you're in your mid-30s, right? How old are you?
35. Yep,
35.
right.
Okay, I'm 35 as well. So, I probably was shopping in the Alpine shop when you were.
Oh, probably.
Yeah. We probably met a long time ago. That's funny. So, every pro athlete's career ends at some point. And part of the reason I had for sort of going back to school instead of continuing to try to make it to higher and higher levels of bike racing was that I was like, well, I'm going to have to retire when I'm 35 or 40. I mean, almost nobody goes past 40.
Yeah.
And so, our bodies just get a little bit older and a little bit weaker. Kayaking, I think, is something you can probably do for a long time. But what has it been like aging, from 11-year-old kayaker, now you're a 35-year-old kayaker. What's that like?
It's a weird thing, as an 11-year-old all the way through, I was always the young guy. I was always the person where they would ask how old I was and I would say, and they would get the like eyebrow raise or the unexpected, like, whoa, really? You're okay. And then when I moved out west, you're kind of young to be moving out on your own. And when I got the kind of the programs management job at the shop I worked at out here, it's like, or early 20s. And so all of a sudden I find myself not the young guy on the river anymore. I pull up to the put in, or I drop a waterfall and pull into the eddy below. And inevitably I'm actually one of the older of the crew there. And so it's a different place I find myself in completely. But aging in this sport is not terrible. I mean, you are sitting down going downhill most of the time. So there's the ability to actually do quite a bit in the sport without being super uber fit.
Do you need to have legs?
You don't have to. No,
okay.
Absolutely not. There's definitely some times where they come in handy for walking around some of the scarier rapids, but it's one of those sports that actually is amazing for people that have issues, mobility issues, or I have a paraplegic friend who was in a ski accident who finds kayaking to be a beautiful sport because not only can you do it without legs, you actually also look like everybody else because your legs are down in the boat. Like there's no differentiation. It's pretty awesome. So for veterans or anybody who has mobility issues or anything like that, it's actually a pretty cool situation.
Oh.
But yeah, it's one of those things where you can pursue it just like cycling. You can cruise around and be at a fairly low level as far as fitness is concerned and still enjoy the sport a bunch. But to really compete at a high level and be either racing or performing in videos and things like that, you have to stay pretty fit. And so as I have gotten older, I've noticed that injuries take a little bit longer to heal. There is some more challenges mentally as far as facing some of those fears because of that longer recovery time, because of the kids at home. Some of those other mental factors pop in, like got a lot of responsibility. If I screw up this line and I hurt myself and I can't work for a few months, what does that actually do? And those are the thoughts you push away and you try to keep out of your headspace as you're on the river because they're not helpful, but they creep in, in those early morning hours as I'm getting ready to go boating, or if I'm going to sleep and thinking about the run the next day. Those are the kind of thoughts that pop in that they never used to when I was younger.
Yeah, I definitely, if I'm out bike racing and there's a big crash, and I narrowly avoid it, and I think, oh my gosh, how much help around the house would I be not contributing if I had a broken collarbone or something like that, and yet you keep going anyway.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's part of our competitive, instinctual sort of processes, isn't it? Those thoughts aren't helpful to us when we're pursuing big game either, but we have to push those aside and go get the job done.
I wonder, I'd be interested to talk to a female athlete who's just had kids and see if their level of risk goes down more than men. I wonder about that. I would kind of expect that it would.
You would think so. Yeah. Self-preservation's an important thing for everybody, but it seems like there's that motherly instinct that might kick in even stronger. But I think that's one of the cool things about the sports that we pursue, and the interesting thing about adventure in general is, I think, most people, most of the time, that pursue these sports are doing it because they're a bit too comfortable in general. Like I know that back in the day, we were doing a film documentary about a French trio in 1938 that was the first kayakers to go down the Green and Colorado river systems in the West. And in 1938, 3 French people coming to go do a first descent kayak run. I mean, they were entering the Dust Bowl. This was like Depression era. They were going into communities where just existing was an adventure. Just pushing the cattle up to the high pasture for the season was an adventure that they could fall off their horse and get killed at any moment. And to see these like French folks come through that were so comfortable in their ordinary lives back home in France that they actually had extra capacity and a need for adventure that's so strong that they actually go and put themselves into harm's way for the sake of enjoyment was kind of a new concept then. And it's something that has kind of been birthed into the full-on adventure sport kind of world that we live in right now. But it started with folks like that. And I could only imagine the looks and the head shaking going on of the locals in like small town Utah, the farmers there, they're just trying to scrape a living with these folks coming through and like throwing themselves down the river for fun, for adventure. Like, yeah, it's pretty amazing what we're willing to put ourselves through and what we're willing to do when the rest of our world is quite comfortable.
So that was a film that you did where you retraced the steps of this French team? Yeah,
we did. We'd spent about a month filming and followed their exact course down the Green and Colorado rivers as best we could. There's a lot more dams now, and the rivers changed quite a bit, but a lot of the gorges and rapids and kind of major sections are the same. So we followed their path. Learned their backstories a bit, kind of made contact with some of the people that they made contact with along their trip as well. Actually met some of the original folks that they stopped through and saw because they were still living. And that theme of adventure was discussed often amongst the film crew in the evenings about, why is adventure so important to us? Why was it important to this French trio? What did the locals think of adventure? And what are the different versions of that for people? And it was one of the big themes that kept reemerging, is that, man, life really is in these modern days and this modern technology for lots of folks is very comfortable compared to back in the day. And right along with that comfort has emerged this whole adventure sport world. And it's hard to imagine that they're not connected in that way, that there isn't that need for adventure within all of us, that isn't satisfied with our daily lives as they are for most of us.
Yeah, it's really interesting to think about it almost reminds me of how when our immune systems are not working, they think that leads to allergies. It's like, if we're too comfortable, then it leads to adventure. So adventure is like, we need something to do. We're like allergic to not having enough adventure. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's true. I think it's true for a lot of folks. And some people add that adventure by gambling, or they add that adventure through other means. I think adventure outdoor sports is probably one of the healthier places to find that adventure. But I think it's something that's within all of us. And I'm so thankful that as a kid, I was given that outdoor sport world as an outlet for that, as a way to practice that need for adventure.
This episode is brought to you by Publishizer, a crowdfunding literary agency that helps speakers, thought leaders, and authors get their books discovered by traditional publishers. A couple previous guests from this show, Colleen Schell, Melissa Lynn Stengel, and myself, have launched campaigns with Publishizer. And that's how I was able to get a publishing deal for Superconductors, because we ran a successful campaign on Publishizer. The best part is that it's totally free, and you can go and their team will help you on this step-by-step process to write your 1,000-word book proposal, and they'll match you with a publisher that fits your topic. So if you want to do that, all you need to do is go to get.publishizer.com/pitch and put in the code adventure. That's get.publishizer.com/pitch, and your special code is adventure. And so before before we started recording, we were talking about some of these films that you've been part of, and to get the most epic shots, you sort of have to push your own skill level, and you want to get something that looks really good on film. What are some of those peak moments that you remember from creating your kayaking films?
Yeah. Oh gosh, there's so many that come to mind. It's there's been triumphant moments, and there's been some moments of epic failure and resulting in injury as well. What do you want to hear about? Do you want to hear about the
well, I want to hear about at least
experience?
one big, send kind of dramatic.
Oh yeah. Well, one that comes to mind not that long ago, I guess it's almost about 2 years ago now. I was actually surfing with some friends off of the coast in California, and there is a spot. There's a town there called Fort Bragg. It's in Mendocino County. In California's coastline there in Mendocino County is epic. It's this labyrinth of rock outcroppings and big waves, and the power of the Pacific swell comes in and just slams itself into this labyrinth of rocks and coves, and it creates a lot of good, interesting spots to paddle, including some point breaks. And
so when you say surfing, you're surfing in your kayaks?
Yep. Yeah. And this is in sea kayaks. So 16-foot long sea kayaks that most people would use to go on a little journey, maybe pack their camping gear in. We take those things out and put them on big old waves and carve them up. So we kind of take a little bit of a whitewater surfing kind of action sport mentality into a sport that's traditionally been about long, monotonous journeys and pushing endurance and crossing oceans and big bodies of water and things like that. So we definitely have a little bit of a different take on it that involves us putting these big old long sea kayaks into some pretty interesting places. Sometimes it reminds me of a whole other story about getting sucked into a giant whirlpool. But this was one that we were surfing a big point break off of Chicken Point. Chicken Point is a spot where the local fishermen would in the morning mosey on out to the sea cliffs and kind of look and survey the scene, survey the ocean's sea state, and see if it was a day where they should go out and go fishing or not. And this place was called Chicken Point because this is where all the fishermen would go and look and make their decision whether they're going out that day or not. And so a lot of them would chicken out and call it a day and not make any money. Other folks would say, I can get my boat through that bar, I can get through that passageway, and I can get out and get some fish. And that point happens to have an amazing surf wave that just peels off the corner of it. The only way to get a good ride on the surf wave and to get the footage is to get closer and closer to the rocks that form the waves. And so the kayakers also call it Chicken Point because you're literally playing chicken with the rocks. You're going to have to surf straight at all the rocks in order to link up with the wave and actually catch it. And then once you're established on the wave, you can start moving left, surfing away from the rocks and staying in the sweet spot of the wave. And I had a great day out with a bunch of friends. We were getting some good shots, and I was going to go in and get one more wave, of course. And I'd missed a couple of good ones, right? Like I was set up in the spot. I tried to paddle onto them, but they were just not quite the right size, or they were moving fast, or I wasn't in the right place. And so I kept getting closer and closer to the rocks to get into the sweet spot. And then the big set of the day formed up, right? Like I could see my friends out there a little bit beyond where I was disappear. The wave was obstructing my view between us and them. And I started paddling, started to catch the wave, and it was massive. It was going to be a great ride. And I had my boat pointed towards the rocks, got established on the wave, started surfing left, and the whole wave closed out at once. So instead of breaking gradually from where I was and giving me time to move left, the whole thing just collapsed on itself, taking me with it. And knowing what was down wave, knowing what was between me and where that wave was going, I wanted to stay upright because there was nothing but just landmines of rocks just under the surface. And the shallow water makes those great big waves stand up. And so I did my best to stay upright, tumbling with the wave end over end. And when things kind of settled out, I was surfing sideways. The wave had broached my kayak sideways and was carrying me in towards the sea cliffs. And I had gotten myself stable enough to kind of peel my eyes open and look what I was going towards. And I realized that this wave was hurtling me towards the sea cliffs and that I was going to make impact in a few seconds. And so I took that time to kind of make a plan in my head. And I decided when I was going to hit the rocks, I would throw my kayak up and I would kind of tilt away from the cliff so that the kayak would take most of the impact. And I did that, had the most just huge impact with the wave. I felt my whole body just compress into the kayak. I could feel the weight of the wave push the top of the kayak in a little bit, just annihilated the sea cliff. And as I started to try to roll, I could feel that something wasn't right. And I was going to try to roll my kayak back upright and paddle out of there, but I couldn't quite make it work out. I tried a couple of rolls, and the next wave hit, slammed the boat up against the cliffs again, and actually took the boat off of me, which was good. I was done with it anyway. I wasn't going to be able to roll because I could tell something was wrong with my shoulder.
So you were upside down in the water at this point?
Yeah, upside down, couldn't roll up. Waves hit me against the rocks again, so I went ahead and bailed out and did my best to hold on to my boat and paddle. My friends were all kind of off where we were starting to catch the wave, hundreds of yards from here at this point. And I was basically at the mercy of the sea, ducking underneath each wave that would come in. The wave would pound me up against the rocks, and actually I was getting pushed down to the seafloor. And I decided I could push off the rocks on the bottom of the seafloor, moving a little bit towards the direction where I wanted to go, kind of down the cliff wall, back to safety, back into some more deep, open water. And with each subsequent wave, I would get pushed to the bottom, and I would push off the bottom towards the direction I was wanting to go. The boat got ripped out of my hands. I managed to keep on holding my paddle. Probably about 2 or 3 minutes after I initially hit the cliff, my first teammate, his name's Jamie, came paddling in. It was like an angelic figure paddling out of the mist amongst the rocks. I could see his profile coming in, and I think I still remember what I said. I was just like, "Get me out of here!" And he managed to pull his boat into position, and I climbed up on the back of it. As I climbed up, I realized that my shoulder was actually out of the socket. And so I was there at the base of the sea cliffs getting pounded around, trying my best to scurry on top of my friend's boat so that he could pull me out of there. And I managed to do it one-armed as best I could. And he dragged me out into open water, and we sort of assessed things. And the only real solution was to get back to shore. So one of my buddies was able to hook a line to the front of my boat and start dragging me home through the water back to the parking lot where we started. My other friend was there kind of supporting me, keeping me upright. And we spent a better part of an hour in the parking lot, me laid across the tailgate of my friend's pickup truck with him just holding traction on my arm. And he managed to put it back in. It was the smoothest, cleanest reduction of a shoulder I'd ever experienced. I had injured my shoulder the same way when I was 19. And this was far better than the ER doctor back when I was a teenager doing it. My friend was an ex-Marine and had a bunch of training, and he's also just one of these guys that's on the wavelength and can help calm other people down with just his calm presence. So my buddy Jeff eased my shoulder back into the socket, and all was right with the world once again. The boat was crushed. I had just gotten that boat from my sponsor. They're not cheap, they're about $5,000, and there's nothing left of it. My shoulder was definitely injured, and I was feeling pretty depressed, pretty down about it, really worried about my my career, as it were. And it definitely was a bit of a wake-up call that I better get this whole coaching career thing going, because number one, accidents like this could happen again, and it's really hard to sustain a career that way. But number two, I need to do something where I can make a living beyond that kind of 40, 45-year-old sort of age range. So that injury definitely was a wake-up call for me as well.
Wow, that is amazing. Did the initial sort of, I want to use the boat to lessen the impact, did that work out how you?
It did.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, the boat split its seams on both sides of the top half of a boat and the bottom half of a boat are sort of molded up and then fiberglass together, and the boat pretty much became destroyed instantly. So it took such a huge impact and actually compressed so much that it blew both seams along both sides of the boat, the full length of it. And I can only imagine if my body took that same impact. And so having that is kind of like a butt helmet. The boat kind of served its purpose well and protected my body. So it definitely was a good plan, but still a lot of impact, still a lot of compression. And
do you think that you would have had the same instinct if you were less experienced?
No, not at all. I mean, there is a natural instinct to sort of shy away from the big rock you're flying towards, but the ability to get the boat way up on edge and time it, and the actual act of doing that in that moment, in that situation, was all training. It was all just relying on what I'd done previous in different situations. So yeah, definitely not enough time to think about it.
It sounds kind of like the whole, if I'm on an airplane that's going down, I'm just going to jump at the last minute.
If I jump up really high right at the last second.
Yeah.
It's kind of one of those situations a little bit.
Okay.
But
in those 2 to 3 minutes before your friend came to get you, where you kept getting barreled by the waves, what was going on for you?
Well, I knew my shoulder was real floppy feeling and weak. I couldn't hold onto my boat with it. And I knew that the initial thing that went through my head was, oh, geez, here we go. We're going to have to call the Coast Guard. I'm going to be one of those guys being pulled up out of the ocean in a Coast Guard basket, and then having to face the ridicule of my fellow athletes, as well as being another statistic of stupid kayaker doing stupid things, needing rescue, right? And so I didn't want to have that factor in and follow me. But I also started thinking, like, what if I don't make my way out of these waves soon enough? What if one of them slams me up against a rock? What if I get really cold? What if my dry suit tears open? All these things started going through my head. And I just quickly had to kind of force them out of my head and deal with the task at hand, which was pushing myself off the bottom of the ocean towards where I was trying to go.
Wow.
But yeah, those thoughts definitely creeped in.
You weren't thinking about immediate survival as much as you were worried about, like, what if I get embarrassed because I got unlucky or made some mistake? Wow, that's really interesting.
Yeah. Well, I mean, part of the situation there was that we had just gotten done doing a bunch of coaching of students at a big event. And as in that coach sort of setting, in that position, you're supposed to exemplify and do what it is you want your students to do. And I spent a whole weekend training people to not need rescue from the Coast Guard, and here I was about to need one. And so part of that is embarrassment, but also just like not wanting to be the bad example of what not to do for my students. Like, I didn't want them to feel like they had just had a weekend of learning from somebody who wasn't walking their own walk. So congruence and really kind of acting and being and living in my own message is important to me. And I felt that slipping away.
Wow. But Was it that you were putting yourself in a situation by trying to get closer and closer to that rock? Was that, not congruent with that, what you were teaching, or was it just, the wave closed out and you got unlucky? Could have happened to anybody.
I mean, it's easy to say, oh, I just closed out, it could have happened to anybody. I think a lot of people would have just assumed that. But one of the things that's really important is to learn from these situations and really operate from a place of cause as opposed to effect. And what I mean by that is it'd be easy to say, well, the wave did this to me. And I was just sort of at the mercy of it, and that was the effect. But in reality, if you walk that decision-making process back, there were some things that I did that caused me to be in that situation. And owning those things is so key and so important to take away from that situation is the learning. And I think that's impossible if we're living at effect. So a big part of what I like to do is put people at cause as much as possible. And if there's something you could influence, how could we influence it better? And so I actually went back and turned this experience into a bit of a learning experience for me. And I addressed that concern of my own, in my own head about, not exemplifying what I should for my students by actually I built a whole presentation around it and gave it to the local kayaking club. The Oregon Ocean Paddling Society invited me to do a talk. And so I used my screw up as a way to both reflect and process the decision-making process that I did use to put myself in that situation as a way to prevent future occurrences, but also use my pain as a way to help prevent it for other people, and to still maintain that coaching perspective and use that skill set to help other people, because I had screwed up. So the thing that I had screwed up was, one, I got greedy. I wanted one more wave. And actually 10 minutes before I made that decision to line back up, I looked at my watch and I had anticipated it saying that it was time to go. For whatever reason, I thought I would look down at my watch and would say, oh, we only had a couple hours to surf. It's going to be time. And when I looked down and I had extra time, I didn't get a feeling of excitement. I got a feeling of like obligation. Like, I'm not here with this crew that often. It's an amazing place. We drove a long time to get here. I should really probably go out one more time. Like, when's the next time I'm going to get a chance to do that? And so instead of listening to my inner voice and listening to my gut and pausing for a moment and wondering, why am I not excited about another run? Why did I want to look down and see like it was time? And maybe it was because I was done. Maybe I was tired. Maybe I knew something. Maybe there's energy out there. Who knows? But whatever it is, I didn't listen to that voice. And I sort of got greedy and sort of listened to the obligation of I should do this. And then there's also just the fact of like reading the waves and taking more time to look and see what happens on a bigger set. That's a spot that I'd been at before, but every day is different on the ocean. And when you miss a couple of waves like that, there is a tendency that you got closer in. Each time you tried to catch the last wave, you paddled closer in. And instead of sitting there waiting for the next one, I could have taken the extra effort to reset to the original starting position. But instead, I got a little lazy and felt like, closer in, I have a better chance of catching the next one. I'm not going to miss this one. I only have one more chance, right? I was only going to get one more surf. And so taking my time and resetting, going through the extra effort would have helped that as well. So there's a couple of different things going on there, a couple of different decision-making biases that I let creep in and affect my decision-making. So yeah, a freak wave came in, but I put myself in that situation where that freak wave took me out.
Wow. Yeah, that's fascinating. And I think what's most interesting is the feeling of that you recognize you were feeling obligation.
It was operating from scarcity, right? Like it was operating from a place of, I don't get this chance enough. I don't get to see these people enough. Even though I'd been paddling all weekend before that, I was teaching students. I don't get a chance to paddle for myself that much. So operating from that place of scarcity led me to make decisions I wouldn't have normally.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I don't know how many times myself and my friends have gotten injured on ski runs, last run of the day. It's like the most injury prone, or you're just like, I'm so tired, but I have to keep going. because I need to extract as much fun and memories out of this experience as possible.
Absolutely. It's the other side of that, like brevity of life, get the most out of every moment you can kind of thing.
So I think it's the fact that you turned that into a teachable, coachable lesson. The great thing about sports is that they are fertile ground for analogy, for coaching. And I'm curious, which of these analogies do you find yourself bringing from the world of kayaking into the world of coaching the most?
Oh gosh, it's all the time. So it provides so many metaphorical parallels and analogies. I think about, like, in that situation, catching waves. There's a whole sense of timing there and reading the situation. And you can put in a ton of effort and paddle really hard to try to catch a wave. But if it's not the right wave, it's not the right timing, you can really burn up a lot of energy going after something that's not a good setup. And I think that's true in life and in business quite a lot. It's not just the effort we put in. It's also picking our head up and having awareness of the situation and knowing what is the right time to really put on that maximum effort. If we just try to put on max effort all the time, we get burned out. And a lot of times we spend a lot of energy doing stuff we don't actually need to do. And when the cyclical nature or the rhythm of business happens, and all of a sudden you hit this point where you need that extra gear, you need that extra push, and you've already been operating at capacity, and you can't actually capitalize on that. You can't actually take full advantage of the wave that comes your way. Whereas if you can hit kind of a pace and you can understand the bigger picture and get a sense for that rhythmic nature of the business, you can apply maximum effort when it really has the chance for maximum outcome. I think about when I'm working with, like, my realtors and loan officer clients. Do you really, what are you putting your maximum effort into during this December, January, when nobody's selling their house? Maybe this is a time to actually let off a little bit, regroup, reflect on the year, actually pause, and go back into building relationships, and then when it hits the springtime, have the capacity to go hard and really take advantage of that cyclical nature of the business. And every business is different, but we have those natural flows of things where I think knowing when to turn it on full blast and knowing when to ease off is important. So that's just one example of an analogy where it applies across business and sport.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And I've had that experience of surfing when you catch the first wave of the set and you're like, oh, this is pretty good. But then, you see someone have the ride of the day on the next wave. And so leaving capacity open for the absolute best opportunity to come along so you can actually catch that one. It takes this patience, because you just want, this opportunity is like pretty good. Mm-hmm. And it's so hard to build in not going full speed ahead.
It applies to, like, finding your niche as well. I think when we're out there in the beginning, we'll service everybody we can, and we don't take the time to really pick the best client for us. And as a result, we do okay. The ride is fine. But if you just waited and really picked that right wave for you, or picked that right customer for you that was within your niche, all of a sudden you style that thing and it is the ride of the day and you're the one doing it as opposed to the one watching it. So I think it can apply to that, and that same sort of sense of scarcity when we operate from that scarcity and want to just pick up every client, even though it's not really in our wheelhouse. Mm-hmm. It limits us and kind of takes up all of our capacity, so we don't have anything left when that perfect client actually is there. Same sort of thing.
Yeah, wonderful. I think that's a great place for us to wrap. And I know you have a lot more stories, so
many.
Definitely love to have you back. Paul, where can people find you online should you wish to be found?
Sure. Yeah. So on the old social media, Instagram, Facebook kind of world, you can definitely find us at Tributary Coaching. We just got a brand new website up at tributarycoaching.com that's got some great free resources, including some free books. And you can also access the Activate Your Life book that we both worked on as well from that resources section of tributary.coaching. tributarycoaching.com, tributarycoaching.com. And then also in there, I'll have blog posts and all sorts of fun things. We just did a new brand video that kind of shows some more of those analogies of kind of running a waterfall and running a business, and tying a bit of my athletic world together with my new business coaching world. So check that one out. A couple of minutes video on Punch Bowl Falls here in Oregon. It's just epic, beautifully shot. Little piece put on, had Uncaged the Soul Productions put that together for me. Those guys did an amazing job. So yeah, go check out tributarycoaching.com, watch the fun little waterfall video there, and check out some of the free books and resources, and let us know if you have any questions.
Brilliant. Paul, thanks so much for coming on the show. I had a blast.
And thanks for the opportunity. Always fun to chat, and I'd love to come back, and we'll have to connect next time we're both in St. Louis.
For sure. And hopefully I get out to Portland again sometime, because I love it out there too.
It is here for you. Come on out.
Right on. Keep it real. Whatever you kayakers say.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Stay in the flow.
Stay in the flow. There you go. All right, Paul.
Thanks, Derek.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Another great episode with Paul Kuthe. I just love hearing how people at the top of their game in sport or game or profession or whatever, how they think about the activities that they do, the level of risk and their skill level. You know, it's telling that, you know, Paul generally does things conservatively compared to where his skill level is, at least in terms of physically risky things. It'll be interesting to see how that translates as his next career progresses. So if you want to keep track of his work through Tributary Coaching, make sure you check that out. I'm really excited when I see people that have succeeded in one area, how they can bring that analogy over into a new field. We would love to hear what you got out of this episode. So send either of us a message or leave it as a podcast review on iTunes. We love that. And yeah, let us know what your takeaways are, if this opened up any insights for you, or if you just really loved hearing Paul's storytelling, because that was quite dramatic as well. That's all for today's episode. Now it's your turn to go out there and be adventurous.